So let's jump right in with a question that sits at the very heart of one of the world's oldest spiritual traditions, and it's a big one. How do we find real, lasting peace and finally end that constant dissatisfaction we all feel in our lives? Well, the ancient texts call this state Nibbana. In this explainer, we're going to trace the path to get there, pulling everything directly from the source material.
It really all kicks off with this universal question. It's one that I'm sure every single one of us has asked at some point, maybe in a tough time or just in a quiet moment of reflection. Why do we suffer? Why is there this nagging feeling that something just isn't quite right?
Okay, so before you can find a cure for anything, you first need a really clear diagnosis, right? So the first step on this path is to just look, unflinchingly, at the problem itself, what these texts describe as a universal condition for all of us.
Now, when the texts talk about suffering, or dukkha, they're not just talking about the big, obvious stuff like pain or loss. It's actually something much, much broader. It's that underlying sense that things are always changing, they're unreliable, and, ultimately kind of unsatisfactory. Think of it like the subtle background hum of stress that we live with every single day.
And the sources are incredibly direct about this. This isn't some abstract philosophy. It's about the unavoidable realities of just being a person, getting older, getting sick, and eventually dying. It also includes all the emotional pain, the sorrow, the sadness, and that really familiar frustration of just not getting what we want. All of it. Every piece is considered suffering.
So if all these experiences are just part of life, what's the real cause of the problem? Is it the world out there, or is it maybe something inside of us? This is where the diagnosis takes a really fascinating turn, because it shifts our focus away from what's happening outside to what's happening in our own minds. And here it is. This is the core diagnosis. And honestly, it's not what you'd expect. The source of our suffering isn't old age or illness in and of themselves, but our reaction to them. It's our craving, that constant wanting for things to be different, that grasping for pleasure, and that desperate pushing away of anything that feels painful. This quote just gets right to the heart of it. It's the act of grasping, of clinging to our ideas, our feelings, even our own sense of self that fuels this whole cycle of dissatisfaction. This constant clinging is the engine that keeps the process going, moment after moment. Wow, what a metaphor! It perfectly illustrates the result, doesn't it? It's a pretty profound psychological insight. The more we feed our craving, the more we feed our attachment to things, the more our sorrow just multiplies. It grows as uncontrollably as grass in a downpour.
Okay, so we have the problem and we have its root cause. The next logical question has to be, what's the prescription? What do we do about it? And the good news is, the texts don't just leave us with a diagnosis. They give us a clear, step-by-step, practical path to follow.
And this path is this amazing, comprehensive system called the threefold training. It's so smart because it starts with our external actions. Then it moves inward to train the mind, and it all culminates in this profound shift in how we see everything, in wisdom. Each step perfectly builds on the last one.
And this first step is so incredibly down to earth. Ethical conduct isn't about following some arbitrary rules. It's about systematically letting go of actions that cause harm both to ourselves and to other people. By doing this, we create a life that's free from guilt and remorse. And that clear conscience, that becomes the essential foundation for the much deeper work of training the mind.
All right, so with that solid foundation of ethical conduct in place, the path turns inward, to the mind itself. And this, right here, is the absolute heart of the practice, the direct cultivation of our mental state through meditation.
Central to all this mental training is mindfulness, or sati, and the texts define it very precisely. It's not just, vaguely paying attention. It's a keen, sharp, crystal-clear awareness of what's happening in the present moment, in our body, in our feelings, in our thoughts, without getting swept away by our usual reactions of wanting this and not wanting that.
So how do you actually develop this? Well, one of the absolute core methods is mindfulness of breathing. And it's a progressive training. It starts simple, just experiencing the mind with the in-breath and the out-breath. From there, you learn to cultivate positive states, like gladness, and that leads to this deep, unified concentration, a state known as samadhi, and ultimately to freeing the mind entirely.
And this is the result of that consistent practice. The mind, which is usually so scattered and all over the place, starts to gather itself. It becomes still. It becomes unified. It becomes powerful. This state of deep meditative immersion, samadhi, is what creates the stability you need for the third part of the training, wisdom, to really blossom. So, where does all this lead? What's the ultimate goal of all this practice, of purifying our conduct and training our mind? The texts describe it with this incredible word, Nibbana, a state of being quenched.
Because this state is just so far beyond our ordinary concepts, it's often described in these beautiful, poetic metaphors. Like here, it's compared to a serpent shedding its old skin. Imagine that feeling, a radical letting go of every single past burden and every future anxiety, just total freedom. But then you also get these really direct statements. This is the definitive end of the line for the cycle of suffering. All those mental chains, the fetters of greed and aversion and delusion that keep us trapped, they are finally and completely broken, gone.
And finally, we come back to this incredibly powerful image of being quenched. The fires of lust and hate and delusion that drive this whole cycle of suffering, they're just extinguished. And what's left isn't some empty void, but a profound state of peace, described here as being cooled, quenched. This is it. This is the ultimate aim of the entire path.
So we've journeyed all the way from the problem of suffering to its cause, through the entire path of practice, and to the final goal of Nibbana. The whole map has been laid out for us, which means the only question left is a personal one. For you, right now, where does the first step on this path begin?